Awesome.
So yeah, as we discussed yesterday, we typically let people trickle in for a couple of minutes and let the video propagate across the platforms. We are, as always, streaming to LinkedIn, YouTube, Twitch, and Facebook. And so you can typically find us through any of the links. I would assume that Dave posted them in the event, but if not, you can find them in the previous URLs for the manufacturing hub.
Yeah. And then I had passed them out as well. But I think that, so we are live. Cool. We are live, but no, it's good. We give everyone a couple of minutes to get in. And this is actually one of my favorite points of the podcast. It's where I get to embarrass Vlad at the very beginning every time, where I tell people that Solus PLC, we're like 22,000-ish subscribers, and I have nothing to do with it. I just love pushing out what Vlad and those guys are doing. And so 22-ish thousand subscribers. They're on the hunt for 50,000 and then 100,000 for a silver play button above Vlad's right shoulder up in the top left-hand corner of that screen for everyone. So if you guys are not subscribed to Solus PLC, please go subscribe to the YouTube channel. And I will make the comment because I know Vlad won't pimp out his own live streams that he's got going on. So if anyone listening now is interested to learn more about add-on instructions, Vlad actually has a live stream going this Saturday morning, 10 o'clock Eastern time. Did I get that correct, Vlad?
1 p.m. Eastern.
1 p.m. Eastern. Maybe 10 o'clock my current time zone, or
That's
the
right.
time zone that YouTube thinks I'm in, which because I'm not 3 hours. I'm only 2 hours. Yeah. No, I don't know. YouTube thinks I'm in a different time zone than I am, but that's a normal thing. That's a normal thing for me. But no, so let's see, as everyone trickles in, if you guys want to catch up on previous episodes, you can check us out at manufacturinghub.live. I think we're still about an episode behind on that of getting them up in podcast form, but yes, so we've got all of that going. A little bit of work on our side. So we are taking next week off. We've got an off week. We're going to revamp some of the stuff that we're doing, get those email lists and everything out that we've promised people for notifications that we're getting ready to go live and all of that. And then, so we're off next Wednesday, but we're coming back Wednesday, the 21st, which should be a very good show with that. Yeah.
I do want to mention on that same point,
side,
Dave,
Vlad?
before we move on, since this was brought to my attention. So the streams, if you're listening live, I'm a little bit behind on uploading some of the episodes, and essentially they typically come in a couple of weeks after the video. So you can see the actual video and obviously listen to the episode on YouTube immediately after it has been uploaded, but the podcast, on Google Podcasts, on Apple Podcasts, and all that is going to be available a couple of weeks after the actual episode airs. Just wanted to make a note of that. Perfect. Go ahead, Dave.
No, thank you. I mean, I think we've kind of hit all of the comments. As everyone knows, as I would imagine most people have been in here before. If you haven't been in here, we try to do a fun live back and forth show. So if you guys have questions at any point of things that we're talking about, please feel free to drop the questions in any of the chats. And Vlad is in front of like 4,000 computer screens, and he will go about the process of making sure that we get to all of the questions. And then if they're very in-depth questions, or you'd like to connect with any of us after, please feel free to send any of us a question, and we'll get you in contact with the correct person. I think we're good to go. Are you good to go, Vlad?
Yeah. You want to introduce us?
Cool. I absolutely do. So everyone, welcome to episode 20 of the Manufacturing Hub with me, Dave, and this guy over on one of your sides, Vlad. Today, we have a very special guest, Luis Narvaez. He's the product marketing manager at Siemens. And I think that this is fantastic. We were talking about this, And I love the conversations that we're having. Luis, can you give us a little bit of the background of how you got into automation and how you managed to make it to be the product marketing manager where you are now?
Yeah, I guess first of all, thank you guys for having me as a guest on your show. I've seen some of the past guests you guys have had, so it's really humbling to be featured as a guest here. Going back to your question, I guess on how I got into automation or how I started or how I even got into my role within Siemens today, it's interesting. I actually I went to school at the University of Central Florida. While I was there, I had an internship at a local theme park. I live in Central Florida, and so there's plenty of them. there's two big ones in particular that come to mind when you think of Florida, and so I got an internship and really got to touch and see automation equipment being used in a setting that was not a factory floor, not a process plant or anything like that, not a wastewater facility. It was really interesting. And so that kind of got me very interested and I don't know, gave me a love for automation. When I was getting close to graduating from the university, I had a couple job interviews and I had one with Siemens actually. A lot of universities they do these career fairs, and so every semester or so they'll do a career fair, and it's usually the same companies that show up to these career fairs. And if you're not familiar with the area where where UCF is, right across the street is Siemens Energy headquarters or campus or whatever. Literally right across the street, you could walk there from the school, and so they would always show up to the job fair. Right, made a little bit more sense. And so I would see the same recruiter every time, and I would always go see them. And then it was my last semester after I had this internship under my belt. And granted, I was at this internship for a while, for quite a while, and I rotated throughout different engineering groups, at the park. But I went up to the guy at Siemens, and I'm like, hey, I know you guys are with Siemens Energy. You don't do, industrial automation, but I really want to get into this field. This is what I've, learned on my internship. This is where I feel like I have my strengths. And if you could just pass, my resume or whatever to whoever, on that side can get me an interview, I would deeply appreciate it. And so, that was that. And I think a few weeks later, I got a call from somebody at Siemens to do a phone interview, and then turned into an on-site interview, and then turned into, we want to hire you, and that was that. And ever since then, I've rotated throughout different parts within Siemens. I started off with what's called the Engineering Leadership Development Program, and that's Siemens and a lot of companies, they do these leadership, they have different names for them, but they're essentially rotation programs. And the nice thing about this is that, the way Siemens at least structured it, it was, a rotation every 6 months to a different part within Siemens. And of course, in the name being engineering, they were more technical type roles. And so being in that role, I got to pretty much dabble in everything. I got to touch, factory automation, process automation, machine tools, all SCADA, all kinds of different applications. And it's really opened up a lot of doors, just being able to understand the different possibilities of just automation. I mean, it's funny, when I got into automation, I kind of just thought it was a little bit more of a narrow focus, but then when you get into a company that does automation and does it well, then it just kind of, you see the opportunities and the branches, and your head starts spinning again. Like, you can't tell somebody, I want to get into automation, and then they're just like, well, what do you want to do in automation? So.
Louis, I have multiple questions
So yeah,
based
anyway,
on
so
that.
after
Sorry, go ahead. Go ahead. Go ahead.
no, sorry, there's a little bit of delay with the audio, so I
Mhm.
appreciate it. I'll let you ask your questions. I'm sure I'll end up answering them then.
Sounds good. I do want to dive in, before we get to today into the leadership development program. So I know, it's obviously there's many companies that have a similar structure. But, having not gone through one of those programs and just have heard about them, maybe from companies, I was curious about, your perspective. How is that program structured? What are maybe the benefits of it? And I think you've mentioned already a couple. But in general, could you describe the experience? Is it something, again, after those 6 months, do you rotate to something that you choose, that the company chooses? How does that dynamic work? Because I think it's important for new or current engineering students going through these career options to kind of evaluate some of the different paths that they might not be familiar with.
Yeah, I mean, there's there's a lot of directions I could go with this. I guess I'll just kind of, I mean, I love the idea of a development program in general. I think there's, I would say myself, and I didn't mention this, sorry about that. I graduated with an electrical engineering degree. And so, um, a lot of times when you go to engineering school, you're just kind of like, you learn what they teach you in school, but it's very kind of general applications, in general towards electrical engineering. But there's some schools are a little bit more focused towards like PLC programming, some are focused towards microelectronics, some are more focused on software development, and some are more just, general and stuff like that. And but I didn't have an idea specifically what I wanted to do. I knew I wanted to be an engineer because I was going to school to be one, but I didn't know what field excited me as much, until I did my internship and did a little bit more dabbling in the automation space. And so I will say that the any kind of development program where you get to rotate throughout different parts of a given company is beneficial in that respect, that if you don't know exactly what you want to do or what kind of job title you want to have or what kind of responsibilities or tasks you think you would fit in, a rotation program is perfect because, if you get dumped into a rotation that you're not really excited for, you don't really think it's a good fit, it's only temporary. You're only there for a given amount of time, and hey, I don't want to do that job. That one's not for me, right? And so you move on to the next rotation. But the unfortunate thing is that it is a limited amount of time. So if within that time you still don't find something that really excites you, there have been times, with past colleagues where there's been a struggle of like, I don't really know where I fit in this company, or I don't know where what I want to do within the company. And that's perfectly fine. And I think that's, it's scary, but you end up getting some experience that you can then take with you that you don't realize is very valuable when, either you go looking outside of Siemens, or if you do go look within Siemens. But the other thing I would say is that it really gives you an opportunity to network and build connections within the company that you're doing these rotations with, right? I will say right now that I would not be in the position I'm in at this moment had I not made some of those connections, had I not networked with the people that I work with today when I started with Siemens.
Mm-hmm. No, absolutely. And
Having
I think,
said that, you had a question about. Sorry, I think this delay is a little weird. Having said that, I guess you had a question. You had a question on like the structure, right? Whether these rotations are predetermined, whether you get to decide where you go, what part of the company. In a way, I mean, it really depends. It's very situational. My particular situation was a little bit unique. But there's generally a structure. There's usually an idea of, what rotations you're going to be going to. That doesn't mean that there's not opportunity to branch out of those directions. If you network early on and the schedule seems to fit and their managers are, have availability and things like that, you can kind of branch into areas that that interest you, right? So I've had colleagues of mine that maybe didn't have a rotation lined up for application engineering, and they networked with one of the engineering managers or something, and happened to work into their program, to do a rotation as an application engineer, and it worked out because that's where they ended up rolling off into, because they really enjoyed it. So
Yeah, and I completely, that's something that I wanted to highlight from your response. I think, networking is certainly a skill that gets talked about a lot, but I feel, including myself, especially earlier in my career, I didn't fully understand the importance of it, right? And I think it's not about just building the connections, but it's just making yourself, how to say it, like known to the company or within the company, so that when a position becomes available that you're interested in, that person to some extent knows that you would be like the right fit, right? Because you could be an excellent engineer, you could be very knowledgeable and performing really well. If someone who has that opening doesn't know about your skills and your interests, then it's just not going to happen, right? And so I think, again, looking back at myself, especially earlier in my career, I didn't have that outlook on the long term, and it's something that I feel every engineering student should pay close attention to. Louis, where did you end up after
Agreed.
the rotational program, and what about could you give us some more information about your current role as well, especially when it pertains to the different product lines at Siemens?
Yeah, so I've been with Siemens for about 7 years, right? So I graduated in 2014. We're in 2021 now. Actually, my work anniversary is next week. Now that I think about it. But so the rotation program that I was part of, it's a 2-year program. So after you do 4 rotations of 6 months, and so after that, the 4th rotation, then you roll off into a position, and hopefully by that point you've networked enough, you've kind of gotten a lay of the land of who's who in the zoo, that you find yourself rolling into a position that excites you, that interests you. I actually rolled into a position that was one of my rotations. My 3rd rotation, I was an applications engineer for our machine tools business, and so when I finished the program, there was an opening for an applications engineer. And so I knew the manager, I knew all the engineers. It just happened to be a really good fit. And it was based out of my hometown in Chicago. So it was, a really good fit for me there too. And so, so I took that and then did that for a couple years. And then, so my hometown is Chicago. I was born there. I grew up in Florida. And shortly after I took the position, my wife and I, my then fiance, we got married, and all of our families back in Florida. So, we thought, well, let's see if we can find something that, is closer to home. And so it just happened to be really good timing that there was a position for an automation consultant down in Florida. And so I applied for that and got that position. And then there was an opening within the marketing department to be a product manager. And my first rotation was working very closely to a lot of the product managers. And I think, again, like I said, had I not worked closely enough with them, had I just kind of, had I not networked with them enough, I probably would not have gotten that position. I either would have been, an automation consultant or an application engineer in Florida, which is fine too. I love the technical stuff, but there was an opening in marketing, and I actually got a call from my current manager now about the position, and it was a good deal, and we went from there. So that's how I ended up being the product manager for our S7 1200 PLC, 1200 and 1200 safety.
Louis, we got a question from your colleague in the chat who's putting you a little bit on the spot. He wrote, after my internship, I knew the next big company I wanted to work for and why. I am curious what drove Louis to seek out Siemens. And I guess this takes us back a little bit to your college days. You mentioned that you worked in I guess like parks and attractions, and you were looking at a recruiter that has been coming onto campus multiple times. So what kind of drove you to Siemens? What made you decide to go that route?
Yeah, I mean, to be fair, Siemens was not my only job option or job offer. I made it a point to attend every job fair I could, even if I had offers lined up, because you don't really know until you go through these interview processes, until you really talk with people. And even through the interview process, sometimes you don't get a really good grasp on what you're getting into. And that's a lot of your time that's being invested in this. Just like somebody else, the company that's interviewing you and the people interviewing, they invest a lot of time, their time and their money and resources to make a good hire, right? So to be fair, it was not the only offer I had. I really, really did enjoy working at the theme park. It was a very fun job, as you can imagine. It was a very rewarding job. But my thoughts at that time were just the development program, the idea of going through different rotation and testing out different parts of a big company like Siemens, who's very well known in the industrial automation space and has very good products. And that I thought was a better opportunity career-wise for me at that point. A better chance to grow. So that's why I ended up choosing Siemens. Was their development program just seemed to be a little bit more clear.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Clear choice, I guess.
Looks like we.
Which colleague asked that question?
Huh? That was from John to tell him. Looks like we lost Dave for a second. That being said, we have another question from Zach, who was on the podcast a few episodes ago. But he's asking, what is your favorite part about being a product manager? And I do want to come back, I guess, to the rides and the first job that you had, because we want to discuss that, I guess, non-traditional application of controls for sure. And we'll get to that in a second. But what do you think, product management role? How does it? And I think let's answer that question. But I want to maybe also discuss the general, transition from like more of a technical background into someone who's doing a combination of marketing as well. But what are your favorite parts about being a product manager?
I think probably the it's a little bit of combination of my favorite parts of everything I've done at Siemens so far. So I get to educate, I get to play around with hardware, be technical in a way. I get to also do a little bit of business development, help our sales colleagues. I think, like I said, that's probably what I really like about it. And the marketing department is also, I guess, being part of marketing, it's a little bit more open as to how you can get ideas out there, right? There's a lot more tools at your disposal to, if I want to create a short video on like a given cybersecurity feature, that's part of the job. And so I can do that. And I have the technical background that I can create this content and I can share it, therefore educating the market on, hey, there's, these tools, these features, these things you can do that will make your platform or your machine or your plant much more robust or safe or secure or whatever the case is. So that's probably what I would say is my favorite part of being in this role.
I'd be curious about the transition though. I think, again, looking up myself, who's always been in very technical roles, and, you spend days, sometimes weeks coding on the same maybe application or challenge. What are maybe the components, or how to even, I
Mhm.
would say, like from the rotational program side, maybe how do you get or purposefully learn skills that would be more applicable, towards marketing? And what changes do you see in your, like you said, I think you create a lot more content, you educate your customers, but how does that shift happen? I'm very curious about that.
Yeah, I'll be honest. When this opportunity came up to take this position, I was a little bit hesitant because I love being technical. And, you know, if you ask me when I started with Siemens or even when I graduated, from the university, if in 7 years, I'd be a product manager, a product marketing manager, I'd work in the marketing department, or I would have not believed it. It's definitely not an area that I saw myself doing, but I genuinely enjoy this position. I would say, the transition actually was not that bad. Like I said, I kind of have a little bit more free reign as to how technical I want to be. There are some people that are, product marketing managers that just prefer to kind of stick to presenting and doing the PowerPoint and just staying marketing. And then there are others that are, just have that technical background, just like myself, and choose to kind of be a little bit, to kind of hone in on those strengths. And I think that's again what I really like about this position, is it allows me to kind of focus on my strengths, focus on what I really like to do, and keep that technical stuff. I will say it's not, the technical stuff I'm doing is not like I'm on site in the trenches, coding a machine and things like that. It's not doing that kind of stuff anymore. So that is a little bit of adjustment period. But the nice thing is, I have two little girls. One's 1 year old, one's 3, and I get to, be home a little bit more and help them out too. So that's kind of the trade-off of that, and that's more important to me, if anything, anyways.
Dave, what do you think?
No, absolutely. No, I would agree, and I'd like to highlight one of the points that you guys made. Again, talking about the educational aspect of marketing. For me, when I look at marketing, I absolutely look at the educational side. And our guest last week, Zach, also with an engineering background, also moved into the marketing. Also talking about the educational aspect of marketing as being one of the most important. And so that kind of brings me to another topic that I'd be interested. So I'm sure that you talk to lots of different companies. Some are probably running Siemens everything. Some may not have necessarily heard of Siemens because we're over in the US and Siemens doesn't own the same market share it owns in Europe. So when you go and you're having these conversations, if someone is saying, hey, I don't know Siemens, or I've never worked with Siemens in the past, how do you generally handle those objections? How do you go and talk them through kind of the depth and breadth of your product cat and what you guys have done as a company?
Yeah, I think it's very situational. So it really depends on the person and the situation that you're in. But yeah, I mean that's definitely one of the challenges. And honestly, I'll just say it's a challenge just in general for automation, for industry, just to change mindset, right? I mean, we know, you guys know, our audience knows, automation is changing, manufacturing is changing. It's no longer about ones and zeros. It's no longer about just PLCs. We've got, edge integration. We've got cloud. Now we got to worry about cybersecurity. Now we've got to worry about, 5G networking and wireless networking and all kinds of buzzwords and the AIs and the MLs and all kinds of, trends in industry, and it's happening so fast that I think the biggest challenge in general is just getting people into that mindset, getting people to break out of their comfort zone and accept change. And I think the easiest way that I have, not easiest, I guess, but the best way, the most effective way that I've seen that is to focus on the customer's issues, right? Focus on what they're experiencing, their pain points right now, and then build off of that. So, instead of focusing on the product itself or the brand itself, focus on what do they need. I mean, if you're already talking to them about, if they're allowing you to talk to them about your product, you've already got, your foot in the door. That's already, a good start, that they're open to listening to something different. But it's also just enlightening them of, there's a different way of doing what you're doing. And let me show you, this different way. And it could be, with safety, it could be, whatever the case is. But I guess, to go back a little bit, it's not necessarily a biggest challenge is to, I guess the biggest challenge in our case would be, just getting people open to that change. But again, once you're in that door, it's a little bit easier to have that conversation because they've already interested, they've already curious, right? So.
No, absolutely. I completely agree that I think education really kind of solves, I wouldn't say like solves the problem, but I feel that there's how to say it, a difficult learning curve when, trying to migrate or exploring new solutions. And I find it to be particularly true in manufacturing, right? And I think a lot of OEMs are starting to recognize that, giving these tools to engineers earlier on and making, the documentation available, the trainings available is extremely important in at least having them, try the platform before they make a decision, right? Because a lot of times it's just maybe that like first step that could be a barrier to, bringing something different into the facility. And again, seeing how it performs and then deploying it onto the rest of your floor.
Yeah, I think a big push right now that we're starting to see to help kind of ease those learning curves and kind of ease those transitions. And, there's a lot of, from what I see, there's a lot of motivation for companies, for manufacturers, for factories to get away from a vendor lock scenario where they can only use vendor A because, that's just what they've always had, and for the spare parts, and whether it's the best solution or not, that's the way it's always been, and it's too much to change now. And so part of that, what we're starting to see is organizations starting to adopt more open standards that can be applied across platform, and whether that means communication structures, whether that means using more open communication protocols, that I think will definitely change how automation projects are approached in the future. If not, it's already, at least how they're being approached now, is by leveraging those open standards. And that's what I think what I really like about Siemens is that they recognize that this is kind of the direction that industry is going, and start to try to adapt some of those open standards, right? We've integrated OPC UA into our pretty much all of our products. We've starting to integrate edge functionality into all of our products, starting with our HMIs and our PLCs, cloud connectivity, open protocol standards, robot integration. I mean, there's a ton of areas. TSN is another, kind of, I guess, standard that's kind of being tossed around, buzzword standard that's, a lot of manufacturers are going to start adopting. And we're starting to see that. And I'm not just saying, necessarily just in Siemens products. There's other vendors that are doing that too. And you can see it when they start to integrate all these features. It's because of that push to to adapt those open protocols and break away from those vendor lock scenarios. That way they can all play well together and mesh well together and communicate.
I'm not, Louis, I'm not familiar with TSN as much. I don't know. Are you able to give us maybe a definition for those who are listening in on also maybe like what is that exactly?
On
I'm
the
looking it
spot.
up myself. Time sensitive
So from what
networking protocol.
Yep. Yeah, so TSN, I'm not the communications expert, so somebody's probably gonna fact check me on all this, but TSN is basically a time sensitive networking. It's a standard standard pushed by IEEE to kind of formalize high speed, real-time deterministic communications. Because you guys know that right now we've got all these different types of protocols and all of them use different types of technology. Profinet is kind of the leading protocol with Siemens, with our PLCs, and there's Profinet RT, which is the standard Profinet real time. There's Profinet IRT, which is isochronous real time. That's for more deterministic, high speed, 32 microsecond communications. And you've got EtherCAT and you've got Ethernet IP and SIP sync and all these different protocols that are they're open, but they're very tied to very specific brands of controllers and motion platforms. And sometimes, even like with the case with Profinet IRT, require very specific hardware, very specific chipsets, right? And so it's not widely supported. With TSN, it kind of creates a standard that if you are going to create a Profinet TSN or a Ethernet, a EtherCAT TSN, or I don't throw another protocol out there and add TSN at the end, that we're all following the same hardware, the same rules, the same structure, and therefore kind of being able to use the same technology. I don't know if that makes any sense, or I'm not,
No,
again, I'm not the communications expert, but from, the TSN standard also is not completely finalized from what I understand. It's enough that manufacturers and organizations can start developing their protocols to adapt the TSN standards, but it's not, completely, finalized and framed out from the last I heard. I could be wrong.
No, that makes sense. I guess
If
while
somebody in the chat knows, please correct me.
As you were discussing it, I pulled up a page and it looks like it's an IEEE 802.1 standard that enables faster transfer speeds, right? And especially with the adoption of 5G and I guess the increase of bandwidth of data that we're trying to collect at the plant floor, it's going to standardize, as you said, but also increase the available bandwidth of internet or Ethernet based protocols. So that makes sense. No, it's a little side note.
Yep.
I heard you mention it, so I was just curious what it was, but that makes sense.
No, perfect. So it looks like behind your right shoulder, you have some fun, interesting toys. Can we potentially segue into you giving us a little bit of a rundown of what you've got there?
Oh boy. So I'll start over here. Let me see if I can bring it closer to the camera. Unplug this.
Oh, just rows and rows of stuff. You're gonna make Vlad jealous.
An S7-12. I've got an S7-1200 controller. This one actually happens to be a safety variant of it. We've got a Profinet enabled push button. This is one of the products that I manage is the 1200. Again, it comes in standard, fail-safe, and different model variations depending on I/O count, expansion options, memory requirements, things like that. And then right next to that, I actually have, I think, a pretty cool toy. Is our open controller, our ET200 SP open controller This has actually been out for, I want to say, since 2014 or 2015. This is actually our second variant of it. The first variant had Windows 7 embedded and some different hardware specs and stuff. But this one has Windows 10 IoT, expandable I/O, has a Windows kernel, and it also has a software 1500 running on here. You can have it standard or fail-safe.
So it runs. You can program that with TIA
and I think
Portal,
later
or you
this year
could
we're
run.
actually releasing one.
Sorry, or you could run Windows applications or program it like you would a normal like 1500 series PLC.
Yep. Yeah, that's the idea. So you can have an HMI runtime on the PC, or you can have your own application on the PC talking with the software PLC. The software PLC is like on its own kernel. So if Windows crashes or, it doesn't stop the process, but yeah, that's kind of the purpose of it is, there are situations where customers will have, custom applications and they want to interface with a PLC and have high-speed data transfer to the PLC. And so that's one of the options we have. We also, I think later this year, we're coming out with one with a Linux operating system on it, a Linux-based operating system on it. But right now, it's only Windows 10.
Makes sense. We got a question from Zach.
It's a fun
follow-up.
It's a fun product.
No, absolutely.
It seems it.
It's interesting. I guess I was going to ask about like the Linux environment, because a lot of the OEMs are going that route, being a more open structure than Microsoft's Windows. But yeah, it makes sense, I guess, that you're going to release something along those lines. Well, we've got a question from Zach that I wanted to not forget, because it's about the marketing aspect that we just talked about. So he says, being in a market leader position with Siemens and Profinet, how have you adjusted your marketing stance to an IIoT Industry 4.0 while keeping legacy Industry 3.0 customers with a path forward? Is there a strategy? Do you see even, in a way, I don't see a massive divide between Industry 3.0 and 4.0, although some people may disagree. There's certainly, I think, a mentality shift on how things need to be done. But do you like segment those customers in such a way and have maybe different strategies on how to address their needs and how to like maybe communicate with them?
I'm not sure okay, so I guess when we talk about, at least my understanding of when we talk about migrating legacy customers into an Industry 4.0 infrastructure, right? My first thought goes to converting Profibus to Profinet, or Ethernet-based protocols, right? To be fair, Profinet is more of a field bus protocol. So usually you'll see it, lower from the PLC downward to your field I/O, your field devices. In this case, the push button that has Profinet directly, enabled also. There's all kinds of Profinet enabled devices out there, encoders, safety switches, whatever the case is. So, but there's still a ton of people out there that are running Profibus, the purple cable. And, that's a serial-based protocol. It's very popular in industry. But that's what I think of, right? And I think once you go into a Profinet infrastructure, you've already got some pieces in place to migrate to get into an Industry 4.0 scenario. From a technology perspective, I will say that Siemens has definitely considered any kind of developments we do in our products. We always consider supporting the current install base, right? How can we adapt this to the current install base so that way it's not a complete changeover, rip out and replace kind of situation. And I think with Ethernet-based protocols in general, it's a lot easier to make those transitions. Our PLCs can do OPC UA and MQTT and Profinet on the same, RJ45 port. Probably not recommended, not a good practice to do that, but it's possible, and so being able to adapt those features and functions without having to, say, hey, we're going to come out with a new piece of hardware part number and all your spare parts are now obsolete. It's a little bit, hard it's a tough pill to swallow. So I will say, I mean, I don't know if that answers the question, but I will say that we definitely take that into consideration when it comes to migration, Industry 4.0 ideals, and integrating features that would require Industry 4.0 type setups. That's definitely something we consider, and I think Profinet kind of enables that a little bit.
And what about on the marketing side? I'd be curious to maybe learn, do you see like any like trends in terms of how you communicate with your customers? Maybe looking back at the last, well, 7 years, but let's say like decade or so, how like traditional marketing was done versus what you see now. Because I think, and we discussed it with a couple of our guests, there's going to be definitely a shift, I think, with who is going to be entering the workforce just on this side, right? Because Industry 4.0, I think, brings in a lot of, let's say, software engineers into the mix. IT gets a lot more involved. You start having your controls guys trying to learn the networking side, the IT side, the application side. So is there maybe a shift in communication on how you talk to these people who are going to be using the products?
Yeah, I mean, I think definitely it's in my opinion, it's a good thing, and it's also a challenge too, because it really depends who your audience that you're trying to attract with any given piece of content is, right? You still want to get buy-in from the high level executives, so you still have to create content that applies to them, right? And so things like that would be, panelist type discussions, webinars, things like that. But I think thinking about what the millennial engineer or was it Gen Z or whatever the next generation is after millennial, they're more digital, right? Digital content is attractive. We also, you're starting to see a lot more people programming with like structured text and SCL, and whereas traditional engineers that have been in the industry for a long time are more used to relay ladder logic and maybe a little bit of function block, but not a whole lot of structured text or SCL. And so from a marketing strategy, it definitely puts a different shift on our focus. It definitely shifts our focus a little bit towards that type of engineer, but you also have to keep in mind there's still a ton of old school guys out there. So how do you create that balance of, getting hitting both audiences? It's a tough challenge right now. I will say that.
Dave, what are your thoughts?
No,
two segments.
I agree with what you guys are saying. I think it's I think it's a delicate balance of kind of, this is the leading technology, this is the way everyone's going to go, and understanding that there are people with 1970s 1980s technology there, and finding the balance between, this is the way the industry is going, we as Siemens need to lead the way, and this is where we see everything going, while also not alienating the people who have been using your products in the facility for the last 20 plus years. So I think it's an interesting balance. I think that there's certainly a lot of opportunity in the market to, let's continue to extend the life of some of these older products, while also going through the process of saying, hey, at some point we're going to reach a logical upgrade. And since you've used our products for the last 20 plus years, let us help easily walk you into the path of that. And like Luis was saying, it could be webinars, it could be panel discussions. I mean, once you've done it a couple of times or a couple of dozens of times, you can send out some of those automation consultants, like you were saying, and you can give case studies and other things of this is how we've done it the last 50 times successfully. Let us come help you upgrade. And this is the value and the benefits you're going to see through these upgrades.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think on the flip side, I want to mention the post that I think Lewis had shared this video on the PLC controlled smoker, right? And I think like those kinds of applications kind of really, I guess the word would be like spark up some interest in the PLC space, because traditionally, again, I think manufacturing is not perceived as, maybe like the field of choice for all until they kind of get some hands-on experience. And I find it, I guess it's difficult to get until you get into a company, right? Typically in universities, you might have some small setup. You'll have like a wall with a PLC that turns on some lights here and there. But until you see like a cool application and the capabilities, it's hard to be sold on that idea, right? And so I think especially for newer engineers, it's awesome to see these like cool applications that they can put together themselves as well, right? Because at the end of the day, I think the price of hardware and software is coming down and it's becoming more and more accessible, right? And so obviously I'm not going to build a manufacturing facility in my garage, but if I've got a smoker, I can follow one of these examples and set something up fairly inexpensively.
Oh, absolutely. And then home automation.
Yeah,
A couple
I
of weeks
think
ago, we had. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Oh no, you were hitting right on the point I was going to go to. I think home automation is a really good place to start, right? And you got to think like a lot of the future engineers or the engineers that are entering workforce now grew up, probably building a passion for engineering in the first place, or software development or coding, by joining robotics teams or getting an Arduino when they were younger, or a Raspberry Pi, and tinkering around with stuff like that. And when you bring concepts like that into an industrial space, it's a little bit of a disruptor, but you can kind of adapt them at your own home, bring in industrial equipment and kind of do home automation as well with that stuff. And it's pretty amazing. You saw the video with the smoker. It could be controlling your sprinkler system as well. It could be, controlling the blinds of your home. A lot of PLCs nowadays, Siemens wants to have IoT protocols, built in, so you can set up connections to, cloud systems, Amazon, Amazon clouds, or Google, or, Azure, whatever the case is, and do some pretty cool projects.
I wanted to, Lewis, I wanted to come back, maybe shift away from the technical aspects and talk about your first job and the implications of controls in that industry, which I find like really interesting. And we had Chris Lukey, with whom I believe you're connected with, who's very excited about the different thrill rides. And hopefully he's watching. If not, we'll probably send him the replay. But I want to talk about how controllers are used there, but also the safety aspects. And Zach, I know Zach is an expert on safety too, so maybe he'll post some comments about this. But what are your thoughts on industrial controls being utilized in roller coasters and thrill rides?
So I guess it's interesting. So I knew what a PLC was before going into my internship with the theme parks, I guess. And I knew the applications that they were used in. It was very interesting to see them applied to ride control. These if you really think about it, right, it's pretty amazing, because you have a PLC, a programmable logic controller, which is designed for controlling factories, robots, conveyor systems, machining cells, production cells, process plants, whatever the application is, right? A wide variety of manufacturing applications. is now determining, has my life in its hands. The coder, the guy who programmed this thing, my life is in their hands. And it's pretty amazing. I think it's awesome. If you think about it, right, safety PLCs, a lot of these rides, right, you go into theme parks today, and a lot of these roller coasters or attractions, they're 20 plus years old, right, almost 30 years old, maybe even more. And back then they didn't have safety PLCs. So to like think about the type of engineering that had to go into programming safe routines and safe uh, sequences or whatever goes into for a ride without a safety PLC, 20 or 30 years ago. And safety also is, something that's hasn't been very quickly adopted here in the US or North America, because, I think Zach last week was saying it's different, motivations, where in Europe it's more law, and here it's, the liability shifts a little bit to different people. And so, I think that's probably been kind of the reason why it's been slow to adapt. But I think, it's different, right? We're slow to adapt. Change is something that's, we like to feel out and do our research and things like that. So, but anyways, it's interesting. I love it. I think it's amazing. I know a lot of, engineers in the entertainment space, and my hat goes off to them for the things that they, have to do and have to put into the system. I mean, think about it, right? When you program functional safety for a machine, you're preventing an operator or a maintenance person, or you're protecting, people from getting hurt, or you're protecting the equipment from getting damaged, or both, right? They kind of go hand in hand. But what happens when the person you're protecting is on the equipment? Essentially the workpiece. How do you protect that? And that's I think, been a very big challenge, and very interesting to see.
Just for personal knowledge, is it a different governing body that looks at the safety when it comes to thrill parks versus manufacturing? I would assume it's probably not OSHA, or is it OSHA under like a different segment? What is who sets these standards, and is it similar to what Zach had described for manufacturing, where it's like different across, North America versus Europe?
Yeah, I think no, it wouldn't be OSHA, right? Because OSHA would protect workers, although that is part of, what they program when they consider programming ride safety. It's also protecting operators and
Mhm.
maintenance people, right? But from getting, hurt or injured, or even worse, right? But so they still use the same safety standards, ISO 13849 or 62061. Don't quote me on that. I'm not the safety expert. But they still use that. But I think there's a body within ASTM that focuses on functional ride safety as well, functional safety for ride systems as well, and that kind of takes certain concepts of, the traditional safety standards we use for functional safety and adapts them to the ride control industry. But that's relatively new. I mean, I shouldn't say relatively new, but it's, like I said, safety PLCs in a ride setting haven't really been accepted, probably until maybe within the last 15 or 20 years. So
No,
it's
absolutely. It's an
it's
interesting,
very interesting.
if I may add to that, it's an interesting environment in the sense that, in manufacturing, in many cases, you can protect your machinery from, let's say, most actions of your operator. But when you get that many people on board of a ride, it must be extremely difficult to foresee everything that could or that may go wrong, right? And so you have to be really careful and kind of thread lightly, I would say, in how you not only program the controllers, but also think of a lot of the mechanical aspects, right? Like a lot of engineering goes into those rides. So I'm sure that they must consider all angles and then probably do a lot of test rides. Again, not having worked in that industry, I can only imagine how extensive that process might be.
Yeah, it is challenging because I mean I've heard stories, and I'm not going to name any particular rides or attractions or parks or anything, but I've heard instances where um, maybe not somebody got hurt, but somebody could have gotten seriously hurt or injured at a ride because a certain fail-safe function was not programmed in there or was not implemented properly, right? And like you said, I mean, it's really hard to just kind of imagine, like, nobody's going to be stupid enough to do this, right? Put their hand here or put their foot here, or they got lap bars, those, it's kind of a developing process for a lot of those functions. And there's a lot of testing that goes on when it comes to opening a ride, opening an attraction. There's a lot of verification. A lot goes into opening an attraction. I mean, I think there's a ride may actually be installed a year to a year and a half in advance before it actually opens, right? I mean, that's how long the testing and
Okay.
verification process is. So I because of those, I think, and a lot of that process can be mitigated through newer technology, right? We talk about virtual commissioning and digital twin. It's not really like buzzword stuff. It's there's a lot of companies that do. Siemens does this very well. There's a lot of other companies that do this very well. And I know there's people in the entertainment industry that are looking into using this type of technology to help streamline that testing process, that verification process, and and even like testing things like crashing ride vehicles and stuff, because you don't want to crash a ride vehicle once it's installed. I mean, that's kind of a hard test to do, but it's a scenario that could happen, and sometimes maybe you want to test a certain fail-safe function.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. No, absolutely. It's an interesting industry. I guess it's something that you only probably see on the inside, right? It's not something you'd hear about externally that much. But no, I really appreciate your insights. I want to shift back maybe to Siemens and talk about the current situation in the world that is slowly getting better and better every day. But I know that you guys have had an event recently that was shifted online due to COVID. And so could you give us maybe some more information about that? And I know that people can still find, I think, some of the recordings online if they're curious to learn about the technology, about the offerings, and just listen to some of the webinars. But also, I guess, going forward, how can people, are there any scheduled events? Like, what should people be looking out for maybe this year and the upcoming year?
Yeah, so we're definitely looking to do more in-person events. I think the event you're talking about is our innovations future of automation event that we had. I think it was like 2 weeks ago now, and that was a virtual conference, essentially 2-day virtual conference that we did. And I think it's interesting because I think we will end up doing a lot more. Well, there'll be a lot more of both, right? So for the in-person stuff, I think the next event we have is Pack Expo. We'll be having a booth there, and that's, I think, in Las Vegas this year.
Do we have
as
any
far
dates?
as like
When is that happening?
other events that are September, I don't have the exact dates right in front of me, but mid-September. You could just Google search Pack Expo, and it should pop up. But it's in Las Vegas, Nevada. But that's not a Siemens event, right? That's a trade show that focuses on packaging technology, and and we will have a booth there. So that'll probably, I think that's the first in-person event that we'll be going to since pre-COVID. Another big event that we usually host in person, and we'll probably pick up again in person, is Manufacturing in America, also known as MIA. That one's usually an annual event done around the March timeframe. So obviously, this year it probably won't occur. That actually was done virtually this year. And then there's some other distributor-led events that happen, around the Oktoberfest timeframe that happen as well. So you can check with your local distributor and see what goes on there. If they're gonna, I don't know if they're all doing in-person ones this year still, or if they're planning on moving that out. But so we do a number of those. I think we also do virtual webinars. So last year we really ramped up our webinars. I think everybody is probably does a lot of webinars these days, and it's hard to pick which one to watch. So, but we'll probably continue to do those two webinars a month at least. We keep those on demand. As far as the virtual event we just did, that content is also available on demand. And the nice thing about these virtual events is that, we can keep this information up a little bit longer. We can kind of hit a broader audience, a bigger audience, than having to, go to a trade show where, you can only talk to people that are at the trade show and that visit your booth, or whatever the case is. So it's definitely shifted the dynamic of how we get our product information.
No, that definitely makes sense. I'm personally looking forward to some of the in-person events, but definitely will tune into some of the online things as well. I think we've discussed it with Dave a couple of times, but I think it makes sense for certain, content or certain pieces of that those conferences to be online for sure, and then other components are definitely better in person. So I'm looking forward to everything being available in both formats, so to speak. Dave, any closing questions for Luis?
Yes. So a couple of rapid fire questions of things that we ask everyone. Do you have a book recommendation of something that has either helped you in the industry or otherwise?
Well, I don't really read, sad to say, but I don't really read books a whole lot. One thing, I don't really have a whole lot of time to read books, but I do read. This is going to sound really nerdy. I do enjoy, as of lately, reading more white papers and standards. One thing I did not mention is that I am also doing some of the marketing activities for our industrial security portfolio, and it's not really a product. Security is not really a product we sell, so I don't have like something I can show you. This is our security, but it is something that I have taken an interest on recently, and kind of raised my hand that I wanted to start promoting. And so I've looked I've been reading up on a lot of cybersecurity standards, practices, white papers, and things like that. But one book that I did read, that I, at one point while I was in college, and I think, has helped me in my career, is The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, which I think everybody knows by now. Not anything new, but I think it's definitely helped me with like my time management piece and just all kinds of aspects, not just professionally, but just personal life as well. And I highly recommend any kind of like self-help type book to help manage time or priorities and things like that is definitely worth the effort.
Yeah, and the white papers, I guess,
perfect.
as sometimes could be to some extent dull, but at the end of the day, that's where you'll find a great wealth of information on, especially, these topics that are considered to be buzzwords, but a lot of times are much better documented by either like industry experts, or it could be, professors in universities who get grants again. Because I guess looking back at some of the standards, typically they are set, by projects in maybe the government, the military, the DoD, whatever that may be. And so those people document them really well in white papers. So that's a good tip for sure.
No, absolutely. And if you have a couple of specific white papers, we would love to link to those in the show notes at the end. But I've got one more question for you after the comment. I know that we've talked a little bit about the PLC starter kits. That there are absolutely some very good Siemens S7 1200 starter kits out there. I think either Vlad or one of our former guest Prestons have called them some of the best kind of like value bang for the buck starter kits. And so I guess two questions. One, should people check with their local distributors about starter kits if they're interested in those?
Yes. If you're
Okay.
in the US or North America, I should say, you should probably check with your local distributor to get a hold of a S712 a Siemens starter kit. There's different kinds, but 1200 is a really good bang for your buck, if you ask me.
No, perfect. Thank you for that. And then the last question is, who is the right people that should reach out to you if they've made it this far into the podcast? Who should reach out to you for questions about Siemens products or anything else?
Anybody. I mean, honestly, I try to answer as many questions as I can, either in posts or through messages on LinkedIn. If you want to know the best place to reach me, I would say LinkedIn. But I like to educate a little bit. So even if it's not Siemens related, if it's just technology related, if it's career advice, I still have a lot of growing to do in my career, but I certainly don't mind helping anybody, further their career if needed. So I'm, not picky in that aspect.
No, I really
perfect.
appreciate that, Louis. I think that's a really good message, I think, for especially trying to give back to younger engineers who, as we discussed, are trying to figure out their path. I think it's very important for them to, again, like one other thing that I had personally underestimated is like having a mentor, right? Like someone who's been through the same kind of a journey that you're looking to go through. It's important to reach out. Dave, any last closing comments?
Absolutely.
Perfect. No, thank you, Luis. Thank you, everyone, for listening. All of the questions, all of the great conversation. Again, Vlad and I are taking off next week, but we will see everyone on the 21st. And then if you have any questions, please, again, feel free to reach out to any of us, and we will talk to you guys in a couple of weeks. Thank you all. Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Louis. Really